Chapter 8, Part 6. So, we're going to look at some modern commemorative art. Now, the last 2 centuries are really the modern era. I know it's hard to think back into the 19th and 20th centuries, but that is what we're considering the modern era because of the Industrial Revolution. And some of these comment on that, so we'll get into it. So, these are monuments addressing personal loss, memorials for groups, political leaders, and they're preserving memory, transforming the experience of death, and also dealing with loss. Père Lachaise Cemetery in Paris, France, opened in 1804. So in this case, like I was mentioning about the churches, there was not enough space once these were constructed shortly, within a few years, or probably half a century or something. They couldn't bury anybody under the church and keep pulling the floor up. And then their small cemetery that they might have had in the churchyard just outside, especially in a larger city, wouldn't contain all these tombs and all these graves. So the municipal, or you would say like the county, took it over and decided no more church burials. We're going to just put people outside of the city, and they were overcrowded and neglected. One thing that happens is if the person has no heirs or moves away, there's no one to tend the grave, because now we have these paid places where people tend the grave sites, and that wasn't the case. So things would kind of fall apart if no one was taking care of it. Okay, so now we have these large suburban cemeteries outside of the town, and this was open on the outskirts of Paris, and this is influenced by Romanticism, which happened in the 1800s. So Romanticism had to do with idealizing nature and high states of emotion and sort of a rebellion against the Industrial Revolution. So it has these paths you can meander and walk around. It has all kinds of different styles in here. The families could choose. This is a Gothic structure here. This would probably be more of a Greco-Roman one back here. That's a little less distinctive, but a lot of different things. If you think of New Orleans, the cemeteries and tombs look the crypts look very similar to this as well, with the French influence. So that's another thing you can think of to compare it to. Famous people are buried here, but it's also sort of democratic, where there's all kinds of people buried here with different sizes of tombs. Ophelia is a very famous painting. It's a very famous character from Shakespeare. She drowns herself in a fit of madness, and this is idealized. She's from Hamlet here, and she becomes incapacitated from grief and later drowns, and we don't see any of that here in terms of her going through death or struggling with mental illness. Nothing is shown here. This is John Everett Millais, and this is 1852. He's showing us some of this romanticism of death being sort of part of life and this interaction. If you think of this time frame, a lot of people are dying in this era, in the Victorian era. People died in large numbers from a variety of things. So they wanted to feel more of a connection to the people that died. So they didn't want to show her decrepit or fully, I would say, expired here. So her dress is suggesting a casket. It's lacking all the grisly details. It's showing this poetic sort of feeling. We're back to our cocoa pod coffin in Ghana, and Kane Quell, he made a lot of coffins for a lot of people. Generally, this had to do with the person's profession. Like I said, taxi cab driver might want a taxi cab. In this case, this guy was probably a farmer raising cocoa pods. So they were all personalized, and they're really interesting. So it reflects the life's work, their values, and honors the deceased. In this particular tradition, the coffins are carried around And I don't remember for how many days, but they would walk around with the coffin. So we wanted to be something attractive because the funeral procession was quite long. So here we are with Diego Rivera with this gorgeous fresco, massive, covering a whole wall, of Ministry of Education, Mexico City, Dia de los Muertos, 1923. So Diego Rivera, as you may know, because he's someone who's hit popular culture pretty well, along with his wife Frida Kahlo. We've heard of them quite a bit. There's been films and so on. But he wanted to really show something that was of the local culture that had emerged, and he shows all these people, coming together, and they're looking at these different skeleton puppet kind of figures, and it's semi-celebratory. So it's a mixture of Christian and Aztec beliefs that have mixed together, or otherwise known as Mixtec, if I'm pronouncing that right. So in public marketplaces are sites for parades and celebration. So in private, people would go to the tomb or the grave site and clean the grave off. Kind of what I was saying, opposite of when the Europeans were leaving the graves to fall apart. The gravesite is honored on the Day of the Dead in November, and people would go and clean up the grave, bring some food, bring some flowers, talk to those people, and sort of bring them alive in a sense, in terms of holding their memory and remembering them. So, oh yes, and candles would go to the actual graveyard, right? So this is inviting some political satire and commentary here. Hanging in the background are satirical skulls and skeletons of a priest, a general, a capitalist, and a laborer. So we kind of see the priest over here, and we see our general here, and I believe our capitalist and our laborer. So there's always social commentary with Diego Rivera if you spend a little more time and look at it. Okay, so New Ireland is kind of a strange place. It's in New Guinea. So this is near Australia, and a lot of the cultures are still going strong, partly because the dense jungle, the indigenous people have held out quite a long while against colonization. This is 19th century, so it's over 100 years old, but this is a mask. And in many indigenous cultures, including in Papua New Guinea and similarly in Africa and at times in South America, you see festivals that are going to commemorate the deceased and sort of bring them back to life in wearing the mask. So they're honoring the dead, and they're connecting with those people at a specific date and time through the ritual. Last one we're going to look at is the mausoleum of Mao Zedong. Now, he had this massive thing built, and then if you look at all these figures, this is also a monument to communism, if you think about it. So he's really trying to show the power of communism, and it's aligned on the cardinal points. Cardinal points are north, south, east, and west. So it's important for him to have this sense of centeredness here in Tiananmen Square with the right orientation, and he is aligning to the Forbidden City and Imperial Palace, which was who he took over. Oh, sorry, last one is going to be the AIDS quilt. Look at how huge this is. Now, some of you guys chose this as your example of art that you liked, and I thought that was very interesting. I think it's a very powerful way to express the numbers of dead. I think if they had understood how many people were going to die, they probably would have said a 1 foot square instead of 3 by 6. I don't mean to laugh at death. I'm just saying that the numbers became quite huge, and this thing can't really all be shown in one place anymore. I was shocked because I've been looking at COVID statistics. I was kind of shocked. I didn't realize the numbers were so high with the AIDS crisis, our previous pandemic. 30 million people died from AIDS, or so far, I suppose you could say, and that's pretty overwhelming. So if you thought about 30 million of these 3 by 6 foot quilts, we'd be stretching way off into, two different states with this. But it's an enormous epidemic, and I think we can relate to it a little bit more now, hopefully in a more empathetic or sympathetic way. But this was beautifully done, where people would do these by themselves at home, or family members would do them together, and then they would sort of lay them out together or stitch them together in segments and lay them out with in different events. So it's kind of an event based piece, because no museum can hold all of this and show all this at one time. It has to be outdoors and shown in segments. Sorry, I was looking at the wrong list for the images, cut off early. So the tribute in light, this is where the Twin Towers were. So these beams right here are going up for a while. Now we do have buildings. So this is from 2002. We do have buildings now that are built there, and we do have a museum and a commemorative space. I don't know if I would call it a statue, but it's definitely a memorial that is there. So this is just sort of quickly before anything else was built there, to sort of commemorate hope and aspiration, because light is not something that's material, and it was about, a nod to the spiritual. So it's being built. Oh, this does show the reflecting pool here and the memorial, and it's somewhat reminiscent of Maya Lin's Vietnam Memorial in terms of, like, the slabs and so on. And then there are different spaces, interior spaces down below.